At this station, you'll learn to compare fractions using 1/2 as a benchmark. Suppose you had to answer this question. Would you rather eat 5/8 of a head of cauliflower or 3/7 of a head of cauliflower? The answer might be different depending on whether you like cauliflower or not, right? At your station, you have some fraction manipulatives, some colored pencils or markers, and a recording sheet called Comparing Fractions Using 1/2 as a Benchmark. Be sure you can reach all of your materials. Before we start comparing, let's make some fractions that are equivalent to 1/2. A fraction that is equivalent to 1/2 will be half of a circle. The half circle will be made with all the same size parts. In other words, all the parts are fourths or all the parts are eighths, and you can't mix up the fourths and the eighths. Pause the video and work with your team to create 3 different fractions that are all half of a circle. Start again whenever you're done. Here are the fractions that I made. I made 2/4, 3/6, and 5/10. For the 2/4, I have 2 of the fourths showing. It would take all 4 of the fourths to make the whole circle, so 2 of them makes a half of the circle. And the same thing is true for the 6ths. It takes 6/6 to make a whole circle and 10/10 to make a whole circle. Looking at your manipulatives, all of your manipulatives should look like half of a circle, but you might have different numbers of fractional parts than the ones that I chose. So even though the fractional parts are different sizes and have different names, if they make half of a circle, then all the parts are the same size, then they equal to 1/2. So do 2 things now. First, make sure all of your models are equivalent to 1/2, and then draw 3 of your models in part 1 and write the fractions that go with them. Pause the video now and make sure that your models equal 1/2 and draw your fractions on part 1 of your sheet and write them as numbers. Let's look at the numerators and denominators of these fractions that are equivalent to 1/2. Let's look for a pattern between the numbers that make up the numerators and the numbers that make the denominator. Pause the video and look at them carefully and see if you guys see a pattern. Then start the video again after your discussion. Hopefully you noticed this pattern. For fractions that are equal to 1/2, the numerator is half of the denominator. In other words, if you double the numerator, you get the denominator. Now look at your paper and find part 2. Pause the video and do just the first row of part 2, the part that starts for fractions that are equal to 1/2. And then after you've filled in the blanks, you can start the video again. Here's how you should have filled in the blanks. For fractions that are equal to 1/2, the numerator is half of the denominator. Now let's look at some fractions that do not equal to 1/2. Let's see if we can tell if they are larger or smaller than 1/2 just by examining the numerator and the denominator. This is part 3, number 1, 4/6. Is 4/6 greater than or less than 1/2? 4/6 is greater than 1/2. We know it's greater than 1/2 because 3/6 is 1/2 and 4/6 is more than that. So that means that 4/6 is greater than 1/2. Now let's look at this one. This is number 2 in part 3. This is a little bit more difficult. We're going to try to tell if 3/7 is greater or less than 1/2 just by looking at it. 3/7 is less than 1/2. Why? Well, 3 is half of 6, right? So 3/6 means a half. But this is 3/7, so it's going to be smaller than 3/6. Let's think about it a little bit differently. 3 isn't quite half of 7. It takes a little bit more than 3 to be half of 7, right? So what is half of 7? Do you have any ideas? I'm going to tell you. 3.5 is half of 7. Now that's pretty hard. It's more than the average 4th grader should know. So if you understand it, then you're ahead of the math game, smart kids. Now let's finish part 2. Pause the video and work part 2 with your team, and then start it again when you're finished. Let's see if you filled in the blanks like I did. For fractions that are greater than 1/2, the numerator is more than half of the denominator. And for fractions that are less than 1/2, the numerator is less than half of the denominator. Now let's use this idea to compare fractions. In these problems, we're going to compare two fractions based on how each fraction compares with a half. So if one of the fractions is greater than a half and the other smaller than a half, you can tell how these two fractions are related. So here we go. This is number 3. Compare 5/8 and 2/6. Which one is greater and why? Pause the video and discuss this with your team, and then start it again when you're done. 5/8 is greater than 1/2 because 4/8 is equal to 1/2 and 5/8 is more than that. 2/6 is less than 1/2 because 3/6 is equal to 1/2 and 2/6 is less than that. And this means that 5/8 is larger than 2/6. Here's another one. Now this one's a little harder. We're going to compare 2/5 and 5/9. Which one is greater and why? Pause the video and discuss it with your team, and then start it again when you're done. If you need to, you might be able to make some of these fractions with your manipulatives. So one of these fractions is greater than 1/2 and the other is less than 1/2. Which one is which? 2/5 is less than a half because 2 is less than half of 5. 5/9 is greater than 1/2 because 5 is greater than half of 9. Now do part 4 with your team. See if you can use mental math to determine which fraction is larger. Once you've finished, you can get the answer key with your teacher. Thanks for learning with us.